Welcome to Games Lore to Sleep. Tonight, we're drifting into one of the darkest corners of Bloodborne's world, a place where the rain never stops falling, and where a single act of human curiosity created a nightmare that echoes across eternity. This is the story of the Fishing Hamlet Massacre, a quiet coastal village, a dead god washed ashore, and a decision made by scholars that would curse hunters for generations to come. At first, it may seem like just another tragic footnote in Yharnam's history, but as we move deeper, you'll begin to see why many believe this moment was Bloodborne's greatest sin, not because of what was destroyed, but because of what was violated. Before we begin, take a moment to get comfortable, dim the lights, let the rain outside the story wash everything else away. And while you're settling in, let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. It's always comforting to know who else is drifting through these worlds with us. If you enjoy falling asleep to deep, immersive game lore, gently tap like and subscribe to Games Lore to Sleep for more stories hidden in the shadows. Now, let's begin at the edge of the sea, where the sin first took shape. The rain does not begin at the fishing hamlet. It only becomes impossible to ignore there. To understand why that village exists at all, and why its suffering matters, we need to step back, far from the shoreline, and look instead toward the city that set everything in motion. Yharnam was not always a place of screams and shuttered doors. Long before beasts roamed its streets and hunters stalked the night, it was a city of hope. A city built on a promise so powerful that people crossed mountains and seas just to reach it. That promise was blood. Yharnam discovered something no other civilization possessed, a miraculous substance capable of healing the incurable. Illnesses that crippled bodies elsewhere were washed away here. Wounds that should have been fatal closed, as if they had never existed. Lives were extended. Pain was erased. And for a time it seemed like humanity had found its answer to suffering. People didn't call it magic. They called it medicine, but blood has a memory, and it always asks for more. The more Yharnam relied on blood healing, the more it reshaped the city's identity. Hospitals became cathedrals, doctors became clergy. Healing itself became sacred, ritualized, worshipped, unquestioned. Those who questioned it were dismissed as fearful or ignorant. After all, what kind of miracles should be feared? But miracles, when repeated without restraint, stop being gifts. They become dependencies. The blood did not simply heal the body, it altered it. Slowly at first, subtly, people who relied on blood healing found themselves craving it. Their minds sharpened, their senses heightened, but something else began to fray. Emotion turned volatile. Aggression simmered beneath the surface, the line between survival instinct and hunger blurred. And eventually, inevitably, the transformation came. Those who consumed too much blood stopped being human. Beasts began to appear in the streets of Yharnam. Once people twisted into violent shapes driven by instinct and rage. Faces stretched, limbs warped, minds collapsed inward. The city's miracle revealed its cost. Yharnam's solution was not to abandon blood, it was to kill the consequences. Hunters were created, not as heroes, but as a necessity. Men and women trained to stalk the streets at night, armed with weapons designed to end monsters quickly and efficiently. They wore light armor, not to protect themselves, but to move freely through blood-soaked alleys. Their work was brutal, repetitive, and endless. And it worked. For a while. But hunters were not immune to the blood they spilled. Every kill exposed them further. Every wound demanded more healing blood. Every night on the hunt pushed them closer to the same fate as the beasts they destroyed. Eventually, some hunters lost themselves entirely. They became blood drunk. Addicted not just to blood, but to violence itself. To them, everything began to look like a monster. The difference between protection and slaughter disappeared. The hunt became its own justification. This was the quiet rot at the heart of Yharnam. A system that solved problems by feeding the same force that created them. Above it all stood the scholars. Before the healing church rose to power, before blood ministration spread across the land, there was Biggenworth, a secluded college by a great lake far from the noise of the city. Its scholars did not seek healing, they sought understanding. They believed humanity stood at the edge of something vast and incomprehensible, that the universe was filled with higher beings, entities that existed beyond human perception, and that if humanity could understand them, truly understand them, it could ascend beyond its limitations. Their leader preached caution. He warned his students that blood was dangerous, that insight should be earned through understanding, not consumption, that knowledge without restraint could destroy the very minds seeking it. But his warnings fell on ears already hungry for answers. The scholars dug deeper, beneath Yharnam, beneath history itself. They uncovered remnants of an ancient civilization, beings who had once communed with higher powers, evidence of entities known only as Great Ones, and most importantly, they discovered traces of something extraordinary. Old blood. Blood that did not belong to humanity at all. It was intoxicating not just in effect, but in implication. This blood healed more completely, granted visions, expanded perception. It suggested that ascension was not only possible but tangible. Some scholars believed this was the key humanity had been waiting for. Humanity had been waiting for. And when knowledge promises godhood, restraint rarely survives. Experiments began, not on ideas, but on bodies, living ones. Skulls were opened, brains altered, minds broken in pursuit of something the scholars called eyes on the inside, a way to perceive truths hidden from ordinary humans. What mattered was not consent, only results. And when rumors reached Biggenworth of a remote coastal village, a place where something vast and ancient had washed ashore, the decision was made without hesitation. A great one had appeared, dead, or something close enough, and where others might have seen a sacred event or a mystery best left untouched, the scholars saw an opportunity that might never come again. They gathered hunters for protection. They prepared their tools. They justified their intent with the language of progress and discovery. They told themselves they were seeking truth. They did not ask who would pay the price. Far from Yharnam, beyond the city's blood-soaked streets and towering spires, a small fishing village continued its quiet existence by the sea, unaware that it had already been marked. The rain had not begun yet, but it was coming. Long before scholars learned its name, the fishing hamlet existed quietly at the edge of the world. It was not marked on important maps. It did not trade in great quantities. No roads led toward it with intention. It was simply there, a cluster of homes pressed against stone cliffs, shaped by salt wind and tide, sustained by the sea and little else. The people of the hamlet were fishermen and families. They lived by rhythms older than cities, tides, storms, seasons, migration. They did not chase progress. They did not seek transcendence. They took what the ocean gave and gave back what it required. Patience, respect, endurance. Their lives were hard, but complete. They rose before dawn. Nets were cast. Boats creaked into grey water. Lamps burned low through mist and rain. Children learned to walk on wet stone. Elders remembered storms that had taken ships and loved ones alike. The sea was not romantic to them. It was sacred and dangerous. They knew better than to believe it was tame. When the Great One washed ashore, they did not run. It arrived without warning, carried by currents no one could predict. A massive form pulled from the depths and laid gently, almost deliberately upon the sand. It was already dead, or at least its body was. To the villagers, death did not mean absence. Not in a world shaped by tides and decay. Fish fed other fish. Storms reshaped coastlines. Nothing truly vanished, it only changed. They called her Kos. She was unlike anything they had ever seen, yet strangely familiar. Vast and slug-like, her body bore marks of the ocean, smooth surfaces worn by water, textures that echoed shells and coral. And her face carried something unsettling. It was not human, but it was close enough to remind them of themselves. They did not approach her with knives. They did not cut or carve. They knelt. Kos was treated not as an object, but as a presence, a being worthy of reverence, even in death. The villagers believed, perhaps instinctively, that something vast still lingered within her remains, that her passing was not an end, but a threshold, and within her body they sensed something else, a child. They could not name it, could not see it, but they felt it. A weight of sorrow layered beneath the salt air, a presence that demanded mourning rather than celebration. So they built their lives around her. Kos's body became the center of the hamlet's spiritual world. Prayers were spoken, chants were sung. The villagers did not ask for power or dominion. They asked for protection, for guidance, for forgiveness, for touching what they could not understand. The sea responded. From Kos's corpse spilled strange parasites, pale, writhing creatures unlike any fish or shell. They were not feared. The villagers harvested them carefully, respectfully, believing they were gifts rather than curses. These creatures fed the village. They were eaten, rendered into oil, burned in lamps that cast a soft, unfamiliar glow through the fog. Their light was not bright, but it was warm, persistent, almost comforting. And slowly the villagers began to change. Not suddenly, not violently. Their skin thickened, textures shifted, scales appeared where scars once formed. Some grew shells, others developed features better suited to water than land. Their bodies adapted, not as punishment but as accommodation. They did not resist it. They believed they were becoming closer to the sea, closer to Kos, closer to whatever truth lay beneath the waves. To an outsider, they would have looked monstrous. To themselves, they were simply becoming what the ocean required them to be. There was no madness here, no bloodlust, no hunt, no obsession with ascension. They lived, they worked, they worshipped, and most importantly, they harmed no one. The hamlet was not fortified. There were no walls, no guards, no weapons designed for war, only tools for fishing and survival. They had no reason to fear visitors, until the day the boats arrived that did not belong to the sea. The scholars came with certainty. They arrived with questions sharpened into demands, with hunters at their sides, weapons folded neatly at rest, with eyes that saw not people, but phenomena. To them, the hamlet was not a village. It was a discovery. They saw bodies altered by proximity to a great one, evidence of biological transformation, proof that communion with higher beings left measurable effects on flesh and mind. They saw Kos's corpse not as sacred, but as unprecedented access, a great one, dead yet intact. A physical form available for study, a chance to confirm theories whispered in lecture halls and hidden notes. They told themselves this was destiny. The villagers did not understand the words spoken to them. They did not recognize the authority claimed over them. They only knew that strangers had arrived who did not bow, who did not mourn, who did not listen. The hunters stepped forward first, and once weapons are drawn, explanations stop mattering. Resistance, however desperate, was enough. The villagers tried to protect what they loved. Their god, their dead, their unborn charge, their home. They had no chance. The scholars watched as theory became practice, as questions were answered with blood, as curiosity crossed its final boundary. And when the first blade fell, something ancient listened. The sea did not rise. The storm did not come. Instead, the rain began, soft at first, as if the world itself was inhaling. By the time the scholars realized what they had done, the sky was already weeping, and it would never stop. The scholars did not arrive at the fishing hamlet as monsters. That truth matters, because it makes what followed harder to escape. They arrived as thinkers, as observers, as men and women trained to believe that the world could be understood if it were only examined closely enough. They wore the confidence of institutions that had never been meaningfully challenged, and the quiet arrogance of minds convinced that discovery justified intrusion. To them, the hamlet was already abnormal. Its people were changed. Their bodies no longer matched the ideal shape of humanity as defined by Yharnam's halls of learning. Scales, shells, altered limbs, all of it made the villagers easier to categorize as other. And once a group is no longer fully human in the eyes of those in power, everything that follows becomes easier. The scholars told themselves they were not invading a village. They were investigating a phenomenon. Kossi's corpse lay on the shore like a question waiting to be answered. Every inch of her body represented data, structure, anatomy shaped by forces beyond human comprehension. Proof that great ones were not purely abstract, not just dreams or whispers, but beings with form, organs, history. They had spent years digging through ruins and deciphering fragments. Now the truth was in front of them. And truth, once seen, demands possession. The hunters were there to maintain order. That was the phrase used. Not to kill. At least, not officially. But the presence of weapons always implies their eventual use, and when villagers refused to step aside, refused to abandon their god and their dead, the hunters did what they had been trained to do. They removed obstacles. What followed was not a single moment of violence, but a collapse of restraint. A slow unraveling of intention. The first strike justified the second normalized the third, and soon the distinction between defense and slaughter disappeared entirely. The villagers were not warriors. They were not beasts in the way Yharnam had come to define them. They were fishermen who had adapted to the sea's gifts. Parents, elders, children. But their altered bodies made it easier to rationalize their deaths. They were chained, they were tainted, they were connected to something inhuman, and therefore, in the scholar's logic, they were permissible. Once the killing began, it did not stop at the streets. The scholars had not come only to observe the living. They wanted answers from the dead as well, and from those still breathing, if necessary. The villagers became specimens. Skulls were opened in search of insight, not metaphorical eyes, but literal ones. The brain was treated as a container to be searched, drilled, emptied if required. Pain was irrelevant. Consent non-existent. This was knowledge extraction at its most honest, stripped of ceremony, stripped of language meant to soften its cruelty. The scholars wanted to know how proximity to Kos had changed these people, whether their transformations hinted at ascension, whether communion with a Great One altered the mind as much as the body. And so, they dissected faith. They tore apart the very people who had lived in harmony with what the scholars sought to dominate. Kos herself did not escape this violation. Her body was opened, examined, cut. What the villagers had protected as sacred, the scholars treated as material. Organs were catalogued, substances removed, parasites harvested with none of the reverence the villagers had practiced. And then there was the child, the unborn presence the villagers had mourned. The weight they had prayed for was torn free. We do not know if the orphan was alive in any sense humans would recognize. We do not know if it could have existed beyond its mother's corpse. What we know is that it was taken, removed not out of mercy but curiosity. A Great One's child was not allowed to remain unknown. This was the moment the sin became irreversible. Violence against people can sometimes be forgotten by history. Violence against gods cannot. As the scholars worked, the hunters kept killing. Anyone who resisted, anyone who screamed, anyone who stood too close to what was being taken. By the time the expedition ended, the fishing hamlet no longer existed as a community. Only echoes remained. The scholars left with samples, with notes, with proof they believed would change the future of humanity. They told themselves the cost was unfortunate, but necessary. They returned to Byrgenwerth and Yharnam, carrying the seeds of institutions that would reshape the world. And behind them, the village rotted under rain that would not end. What they did not understand, what they could not measure or catalogue, was that something had been listening. Great Ones exist across planes humans barely comprehend. Their bodies may die. Their minds do not follow the same rules. Kos heard the villagers' prayers. She heard their final chants, cries of grief and fury twisted together. And she answered, not with fire, not with flood, but with memory. A curse woven not from rage alone, but from sorrow so deep it reshaped reality itself. The scholars believed they had gained knowledge. What they had truly done was teach the universe how to hate them. And soon that lesson would be passed down, hunter to hunter, generation to generation, sealed in blood, rain, and nightmare. The fishing hamlet was gone. But its suffering had only just begun. Curses are often imagined as sudden things. A scream, a flash, a divine punishment hurled like a weapon. But what took shape after the Fishing Hamlet Massacre was quieter than that. It did not announce itself. It settled. Kos did not strike the scholars down where they stood. The hunters were not drowned as they returned to their boats. The sky did not split open to reveal judgment. Instead, something far more enduring was born, a memory given structure, a grief taught how to persist. The villagers' final prayers did not ask for mercy. They asked to be remembered. They asked that what was done to them would never be erased, never softened, never justified by time or scholarship. And Kos, even in death, understood that request perfectly. Great Ones do not think in moments. They think in continuities. What Kos created was not simply punishment. It was preservation. A space where suffering could not fade. A realm shaped not by time, but by guilt. This is where the hunter's nightmare began. At first, nothing seemed different in the waking world. Yharnam continued its descent into madness. The healing church rose to prominence, fueled by blood knowledge extracted from countless atrocities, including the fishing hamlet. Hunters continued to walk the streets at night, killing beasts, drinking blood, becoming something else with each hunt. But beneath it all, a door had been opened. A realm existed just out of reach, waiting. The curse was patient. It did not target the innocent indiscriminately. It waited for a specific condition, for hunters who crossed a line already worn thin by blood and violence. those who became blood drunk, hunters who no longer hunted out of necessity but compulsion, who could not distinguish between monster and person, who killed not to protect, but to feed something hollow inside themselves. These hunters carried a mark, not a visible one, but something embedded deep within them, an eye ruined by blood, a lens through which the curse could see them. And when such a hunter died, or when something older reached out to claim them, they were pulled sideways, not into death, but into memory. The hunter's nightmare is not hell, it is worse. Hell punishes. The nightmare repeats. Those trapped within it are forced to relive the logic of their own violence endlessly. Streets resemble Yharnam, but twisted, architecture warped as if remembered by someone who hates it. Blood flows where water should, fires burn without consuming. Old hunters wander these streets, attacking anything that moves. They are not guarding anything, they are not seeking escape. They are hunting, because that is all they know. The nightmare strips away context and leaves instinct. This is the curse's genius. It does not invent suffering, it simply removes the lies that once justified it. Hunters fight forever, without purpose, without praise, without end. Below this surface layer lies something far worse. The research hall, a place shaped from memory rather than stone. Here the experiments that followed the Fishing Hamlet Massacre are preserved eternally. Patients wander the halls with swollen heads and broken minds, their suffering frozen at its peak. These were not volunteers. They were sick people who trusted the church, people who came seeking healing and were turned into proof of concept, just as the villagers were. The curse does not forget patterns. It remembers systems. Above the research hall stands the astral clock tower, a place suspended between layers where time itself seems uncertain. This is where guilt took on a human shape. This is where Lady Maria waits. But the nightmare does not end there. At its deepest layer lies the fishing hamlet itself, preserved exactly as it was when the scholars left. The same broken buildings, the same ruined wells, the same corpse of Kos lying on the shore. The rain still falls. It always will. Time does not move forward here. It circles. The villagers' chants echo endlessly, not as prayers anymore, but as accusations. Every hunter who enters hears them, not as words, but as weight. The curse does not ask whether you personally committed the massacre. It asks whether you benefit from it. Every hunter trained in techniques born from that sin. Every blade refined through blood knowledge extracted there. Every vial of blood consumed in pursuit of survival. Participation does not require presence, only inheritance. This is why the curse spreads across generations. Curse the fiends, their children too, and their children forever. In a world where blood is lineage, this is not metaphor. The nightmare does not care about individual innocence. It cares about continuity, about systems that persist long after the original crime is forgotten. This is what makes the Fishing Hamlet Massacre Bloodborne's greatest sin. Not the scale of death, but the permanence of consequence. The scholars wanted to transcend humanity. Instead, they created a memory that could not die. And somewhere deep within the nightmare, something cried, not in anger, but in endless, unresolved grief. The orphan was learning how to scream, and the world would listen. At the heart of the curse lies something far more fragile than rage. A child. The orphan of Kos was never meant to exist the way we encounter it. It was not born beneath a sky or into a world with air and warmth. It did not cry because it had learned pain. It cried because pain was the first thing it ever knew. Great ones, for all their power, share a strange tragedy. They long for children, and almost always lose them. Their offspring are stillborn, lost between planes, or erased before they can take form. In this way, Kos was already an exception. She carried a child. Whether this pregnancy was natural, accidental, or the result of forces humans cannot understand, does not matter. What matters is that something rare had happened. Something fragile had taken shape within a being that existed beyond human rules. And then humans arrived. The orphan was never allowed to be born. It never felt the ocean that shaped its mother, never learned the rhythm of tides the villagers respected, never had the chance to exist beyond potential. Instead, it was taken, ripped from its mother's corpse by hands that saw it not as a life but as a specimen. A great one's child reduced to an object of study before it could even be defined as alive. That moment shattered something fundamental. The orphan did not die. It fractured. What remained of it, its grief, confusion, and unformed consciousness, had nowhere to go. It could not pass on. It could not grow. It could not forget. So it screamed. And the nightmare answered. Within that realm, the orphan took shape, not as it was meant to be, but as it felt. Twisted, incomplete, hurt. Its body reflects this truth perfectly. It walks hunched, its movements erratic and unpracticed. Its limbs seem stretched incorrectly, as if assembled from intention rather than biology. It alternates between crawling and standing, never settling into a form that feels stable. It fights like something learning what it is, while already drowning in pain. The placenta it wields as a weapon is not symbolic, it is tragic. That organ was meant to sustain it, to connect it to life. Instead, it became the only thing it could use to defend itself. It does not fight with skill, it fights with desperation. The orphan does not leave the beach. It stays near Kos's corpse, circling it, protecting it, anchoring itself to the only connection it has ever known. This is not strategy. It is instinct. The same instinct a frightened child has when it hides behind a parent. Its cries are constant, distorted, almost human. They are not battle cries. They are not threats. They are the sound of something that does not understand why it hurts, only that it does. Every hunter who reaches that beach is mistaken for the same thing, a continuation of the violence that stole its existence. The orphan does not care about intent. It does not know you. It knows what hunters did, and so it attacks. As the battle progresses, something terrible happens. The orphan grows. Not naturally, not gently, but violently, as if years of growth are being forced through it in seconds. It straightens its spine, gains strength, calls lightning from the sky. This is what it might have become, a great one grown into its power. But this accelerated maturity is fueled by rage and grief, not understanding. It is childhood trauma given cosmic force, emotion without control. And when the orphan is finally defeated, something changes. The screaming stops. From Kos's corpse rises a small, pale spirit, quiet, weightless, almost peaceful. This is the orphan's true self, freed at last from the nightmare that shaped its suffering. It ascends, not in triumph, but in release. The curse does not vanish immediately, but something essential is undone. The heart of the nightmare, the grief that sustained it, finally lets go. This is the tragedy at the center of Bloodborne. Not gods versus humans, not hunters versus beasts, but a child that never had a chance to exist, turned into the engine of eternal punishment. And even when the orphan is freed, nothing that happened is undone. The villagers remain dead. Kos remains violated. The rain still falls. The nightmare does not forgive. It only remembers until there is nothing left to remember anymore. Not everyone who walked away from the fishing hamlet left untouched. Some carried the massacre with them, not as memory, but as weight. A pressure that bent their lives inward until there was nowhere left to stand. Lady Maria was one of them. She was not a scholar. She did not arrive seeking answers or specimens. She was a hunter, trained, precise, disciplined. A woman who believed deeply in restraint, in skill over excess, in control over indulgence. Maria came from Canehurst, a lineage obsessed with blood. The nobles of that castle wielded it as both weapon and identity, celebrating its power and aesthetic. But Maria rejected them. She turned away from blood-based techniques and sought something purer. She wanted to protect, not revel. Her weapon, the rakuyo, reflected this philosophy. A blade of elegance and precision, no blood magic, no spectacle, just mastery earned through discipline. And yet, she went to the fishing hamlet. We don't know exactly why. Orders, duty, trust in mentors who assured her this was necessary, or perhaps the same quiet curiosity that pulled so many others toward Kos's shore. What we do know is that she participated, and for Maria, that was enough to destroy everything she believed about herself. Unlike others, she could not rationalize what happened. She could not bury it beneath language like progress or greater good. She saw the villagers as people, saw their fear, their prayers, their attempts to protect something sacred. And she helped silence them. Somewhere in that rain-soaked village, Maria crossed a line she could never uncross. Her response was immediate and telling. She threw her weapon away, not out of defeat, out of disgust. The rakuyo was cast into a well in the hamlet itself, discarded among corpses and blood. The tools she had used to kill innocents no longer deserved to be held. That act was a confession. Maria did not believe she deserved to be a hunter anymore. After returning from the expedition, she tried to atone. She joined the healing church, not to rise in power, but to heal. She worked in the research hall, tending to patients whose heads had been swollen by experimentation. Victims who echoed the villagers she could not forget. Perhaps she thought that kindness could balance cruelty. Perhaps she thought she could protect others from becoming what she had been forced to become. But systems built on atrocity do not allow redemption so easily. The research hall was not a place of healing. It was an extension of the same logic that destroyed the hamlet. Patients were still experimented on, bodies still altered, consent still ignored. Maria could not save them, and she could not save herself. The guilt followed her into sleep, into waking hours, into every silent moment. Unlike others, she did not harden. She did not numb herself with blood or violence. She broke. Her final refuge was the astral clock tower, a place suspended between worlds, above the research hall, near the path that would eventually lead back to the fishing hamlet in the nightmare. She positioned herself there deliberately, a guardian, not to protect secrets, but to prevent anyone else from witnessing the truth she could not bear. And when even that was not enough, Maria chose an ending she believed would finally quiet the guilt. She took her own life. Blood pooled beneath her chair. The same blood she had refused to use as a weapon now spilled freely from her own body. It was not dramatic. It was resignation. But Bloodborne does not grant peace so easily. The curse remembered her. Maria's spirit remained bound to the clock tower, not as punishment but as consequence. She could not move on while the nightmare still existed, while the fishing hamlet still echoed with suffering. When hunters approach her chamber, she rises, reluctant, exhausted, desperate. She fights not to kill, she fights to stop you. And as the battle unfolds, Her tragedy becomes unavoidable. She begins fighting as she once believed she should, with pure skill, no blood techniques. But as desperation grows, she abandons restraint. She ignites her weapons with blood, becoming the very thing she tried her entire life not to be. This is Maria's final cruelty, inflicted not by the curse, but by memory. Her story is proof that guilt does not need to be allowed to be fatal. Some sins don't corrupt, they crush. And the nightmare keeps those people too, not because they deserve it, but because it does not know how to let them go. Not all guilt collapses inward. Some of it endures. Some of it learns how to keep moving. If Lady Maria represents guilt that breaks a soul, then the first hunter represents guilt that refuses to stop walking. Even when every step deepens the wound, Gehrman was not like the others. Before titles, before institutions, before the hunt became ritualized, he was simply a man trying to protect a city that was already rotting beneath its own miracles. He trained hunters not to glorify violence, but to survive it. His techniques were practical, efficient, designed to end suffering quickly. And when the scholars asked for protection at the fishing hamlet, he agreed. That decision followed him forever. Gehrman did not arrive with theories or instruments. He did not seek costs. He stood where hunters always stood, between danger and those who claimed to understand it. He was there to ensure the scholars could work, and when resistance began, he did what he had always done. He hunted. The difference is that this time, the things he hunted were not beasts twisted by blood. They were people who stood between scholars and knowledge. People who prayed, who begged, who tried to protect a god and a child they barely understood. Gehrman did not need to believe the scholars' justifications. All he needed was an order. That is the quiet horror of his role. He did not invent the atrocity. He enabled it. And unlike others, he survived long enough to understand what that meant. After the fishing hamlet, Gehrman did not collapse. He did not abandon the hunt. He did not throw his weapons away or seek death. He continued. He trained more hunters, refined techniques, built systems that would outlive him, systems that were shaped, knowingly or not, by the blood knowledge taken from the hamlet. This is the burden Gehrman carries, not just guilt for what he did, but for what came after. Every hunter who followed his teachings benefited from a foundation laid in sin. Every blade swung with efficiency perfected through atrocities. Every hunt conducted under methods sharpened by the massacre. Gehrman understood this. And yet, he kept going. Why? Because stopping would have meant admitting that everything he had built was wrong, that the hunt itself was compromised at its origin, that protecting Yharnam meant perpetuating a cycle he no longer believed in. So he chose continuation, not out of pride, out of exhaustion. At some point, guilt becomes too heavy to resolve, too vast to atone for. And when that happens, some people do not seek redemption, they seek containment. Gehrman tried to contain the damage, but the curse did not allow that. The hunter's dream was not created as a sanctuary. It was a cage shaped like mercy, a place where hunters could return from death, rest, and rise again, endlessly. Gehrman became its caretaker, bound there by forces older than intention. He guided hunters through nights of violence he could not escape himself. He slept sitting upright, dreamed without rest, waited. His rare moments of sleep were filled with murmured pleas, not for forgiveness, but for release. He did not ask to be absolved. He asked to stop. There is a detail often overlooked, the cry of the orphan of Kos. It does not sound entirely alien. It echoes. Some have noted that it resembles Gehrman's own weeping, the broken sound of a man who has carried something too long. Whether this connection is literal or symbolic does not matter. What matters is that both cries come from the same place, regret without resolution. The orphan screams because it never lived. Gehrman weeps because he lived too long with what he did. The curse binds them together, not as equals, but as reflections of the same wound seen from opposite ends of existence. Gehrman's punishment is not fire or torment. It is responsibility without end. He must guide others down a path he knows leads to suffering. He must teach them how to hunt, knowing that hunting itself carries the mark of the fishing hamlet. And when a hunter succeeds, when the nightmare begins to unravel, Gehrman does not celebrate. He prepares to be replaced, because the curse does not allow witnesses to step away. It only allows them to be continued through others. This is the true horror of Gehrman's fate. He is not trapped because he is evil. He is trapped because he endured, because he chose to keep the world functioning rather than let it collapse under the weight of truth. Some sins destroy you, others turn you into their caretaker, and the hunter's dream ensures that those who carry such sins never truly wake up. The hunter's nightmare is often misunderstood. It is not chaos. It is not madness without structure. It is not simply a punishment realm where the guilty are thrown to suffer. It is designed. Every path, every repetition, every warped memory has purpose. The nightmare is not fueled by hatred alone. It is fueled by continuity, by the refusal of suffering to fade into history. This is why the nightmare does not resemble some alien hellscape. Instead, it mirrors Yharnam. Cathedral Ward appears again, but broken. Streets loop where they should not. Buildings feel slightly wrong, as if recalled imperfectly by someone who resents them. Blood replaces water. Fire burns without consuming. This is Yharnam remembered by guilt. Hunters wander these streets endlessly, not as they were in life, but as what they became: blood-drunk, feral, stripped of context and justification. They attack anything that moves, including each other. They are not guarding anything. They are not progressing toward an end. They are repeating themselves. This is the nightmare's central cruelty. It removes the story hunters told themselves about why they killed. No city to protect. No greater good. No hope of an ending. Only the act itself. Violence looping without meaning. Below this surface layer lies the research hall. Here, the nightmare becomes almost quiet. Patients wander slowly, heads grotesquely swollen, bodies barely functional. They moan softly, not aggressively, not threateningly. Their suffering is passive, endless, ignored. These are the forgotten victims. Not hunters, not villagers, just people who trusted the healing church. Their presence in the nightmare is important. It proves that the curse is not narrowly focused on the fishing hamlet alone. It remembers patterns of abuse. It recognizes that what was done to the villagers was not an isolated event, but the foundation for everything that followed. The nightmare is an archive of institutional sin. And above the research hall stands the astral clock tower, a liminal space where the curse tightens its grip. Time behaves strangely here. The clock marks nothing meaningful. It does not count down. It does not mark progress. It simply exists, a reminder that time continues even when healing does not. This is where Lady Maria stands watch, not because the nightmare demands it, because guilt chose her. But even the clock tower is not the end. Beyond it lies the deepest layer, the fishing hamlet itself. Here the nightmare stops abstracting. It preserves. The village is frozen in the moment after the massacre. Buildings broken. Wells filled with bodies. tools left where hands dropped them. The corpse of Kos still lies on the shore. The rain falls endlessly, not storm rain. Grief rain. The sky weeps not in anger, but in remembrance. This rain does not cleanse. It does not erode. It simply marks the place as unforgettable. The villagers remain too, or what remains of them. They wander the streets, attack hunters on sight, chant prayers that have long since turned into curses. They are not mindless. They are not insane. They remember. Every hunter who enters this place is not seen as an individual. They are seen as continuation. A descendant of the same violence. A carrier of the same methods. This is why the curse does not care about innocence. It does not judge intentions. It judges inheritance. Hunters did not merely participate in the massacre, they benefited from it. Techniques refined, knowledge extracted, systems built, institutions strengthened. The nightmare exists to ensure that benefit is never separated from consequence. And at its heart lies the orphan, not as ruler, not as mastermind, as anchor. The orphan's grief stabilizes the nightmare. Its rage gives form to memory. As long as it remains trapped, screaming, fighting, refusing to let go, the nightmare persists. This is why defeating the orphan matters, not because it is evil, but because it is stuck. The nightmare does not want the orphan to suffer forever. It simply does not know how to end without it. This is the tragedy of the hunter's nightmare. It is not sustained by malice. It is sustained by unresolved pain. And as long as that pain has no release, the curse continues to do the only thing it was taught how to do. Remember, forever. Reaching the fishing hamlet is not an accident. No hunter simply stumbles into that place. The path is long, deliberate, and cruelly instructional, as if the nightmare itself insists that anyone who witnesses the truth must first understand the cost of arriving there. To enter the hunter's nightmare at all, a hunter must already be marked, an eye ruined by blood, a symbol of indulgence taken too far, proof that the line between necessity and obsession has been crossed. Only then does the world reach back. An amygdala, one of the many silent watchers clinging to Yharnam's buildings, grasps the hunter and pulls them sideways. Not down, not up, elsewhere. The first steps through the nightmare feel familiar, which is precisely the point. Cathedral Ward reappears, but it is wrong in ways that are difficult to articulate. The sky burns, blood runs through channels where rain should fall. Statues loom heavier, as if judging rather than witnessing. This is the hunt stripped of its myth. The old hunters who roam these streets are legends undone, once praised, once respected, now reduced to instinct and reflex. They attack with practiced efficiency, not because they must, but because they cannot stop. They are echoes of what the player could become. As the hunter presses onward, the nightmare grows less theatrical and more intimate. The research hall emerges, tall, sterile, oppressive. Here, violence gives way to suffering. The patients wander slowly, heads distended beyond recognition. They are not aggressive. They are not hostile. They simply exist in a state of ongoing harm. This is the cost of curiosity unchecked. These people came seeking healing. They trusted the church, trusted scholars who spoke of progress and salvation. And in return, their bodies were reshaped into tools for insight. The nightmare preserves them exactly as they were left, not to horrify, but to document. Moving beyond the research hall, the astral clock tower rises. It is less a destination than a threshold, a place where guilt becomes conscious. Lady Maria waits here, exhausted, resigned, desperate to prevent what comes next. She does not guard treasure, she guards truth. Defeating her is not triumph, it is permission. Beyond her lies a passage that feels less like a corridor and more like surrender. The architecture dissolves into rock and wood, the air grows heavy, The sound of rain begins to cut through everything else. And then the hamlet appears. The descent is slow, intentional. The nightmare gives you time to absorb what you are approaching. Cliffside paths wind downward. Broken homes cling to stone. Wells gape open like unhealed wounds. The chanting starts early. Voices rise from nowhere and everywhere, repeating prayers that have lost all hope of being answered gently. They are no longer asking for protection. They are demanding memory. The villagers appear gradually, warped by the same changes they accepted in life. Scales, shells, elongated limbs. To the hunter's eye, they look like enemies. But the nightmare makes something very clear. They are not beasts. They are survivors trapped in the moment of their destruction. They attack not out of madness, but recognition. To them, every hunter is the same. Another descendant of the ones who came with blades and certainty. The streets tell their own story. Buildings repurposed into makeshift laboratories. Tables stained dark with old blood. Tools abandoned mid-use. This is where scholarship stopped pretending to be ethical. The closer the hunter moves toward the shore, the heavier the air becomes. The rain thickens. The sky presses down, as if the world itself is leaning in to watch. And then the beach opens before you, wide, empty. Exposed, the corpse of Kos lies there still, immense, unmoving, impossibly present. Even in death, she dominates the space. The tide laps at her body endlessly, as if trying and failing to carry her away. This is where the truth becomes unavoidable. Everything the hunter has fought through, every corridor, every ghost, every broken soul, it all leads here. From the water rises the orphan. It does not roar, it does not posture, it cries. That sound cuts through the storm and the surf, raw and uneven. Not the cry of a monster, but of something that never learned how to exist. The orphan sees the hunter and reacts instantly, not with calculation, but reflex. Another threat, another reminder, another continuation of pain. This is the final inheritance. The hunter stands on the same shore where the scholars once stood. Different reasons. Different intentions. Same blood. The nightmare does not ask whether you came to atone or to conquer. It only asks whether you will face what was done. And it waits, rain falling, waves crashing, for your answer. The beach offers no cover, no walls, no ruins to hide behind, no narrow paths to control. Only open sand, crashing waves, and rain that falls so thick it feels almost solid. This is deliberate. The nightmare strips away every advantage hunters are used to. There is nowhere to retreat into cleverness, nowhere to pretend this is just another hunt. What remains is confrontation, raw, exposed, unavoidable. The orphan of Kos does not wait. It reacts. Its movements are erratic, unpredictable, fueled by instinct rather than strategy. It lunges, leaps, flails its malformed weapon with a violence that feels unpracticed. Because it is, the orphan fights like something that has never been taught how to fight. Because no one ever taught it anything. Every motion is desperation given form. It does not seek to dominate the battlefield. It seeks to drive you away, to make the pain stop, to protect the corpse behind it, the only anchor it has ever known. And through it all, it cries. That sound is constant, uneven, almost human. It does not sync with attacks. It does not rise or fall with momentum. It simply exists. Many hunters find this harder to endure than the violence itself. Fighting a monster is one thing. Fighting grief that cannot articulate itself is something else entirely. Midway through the confrontation, something shifts. The orphan straightens. Its body grows, elongates, hardens. Lightning splits the sky and crashes into the sand with terrifying proximity. The storm responds to it, or perhaps it has always been part of it. This is not a phase change meant to escalate difficulty. It is growth forced into being. The orphan is aging in seconds, pulled violently toward what it might have been. A great one grown into power, a being capable of shaping reality, rather than merely screaming against it. But this growth is unstable. It is not guided by wisdom or understanding. It is driven by rage and fear, childhood emotions amplified by cosmic force. The orphan's attacks become faster, heavier, more relentless. There is no elegance here, no rhythm to learn comfortably. The fight resists mastery. It demands attention, patience, and endurance. And beneath the mechanics, something deeply uncomfortable is happening. You are turning suffering into a pattern. You are learning when to strike, when to dodge, when to exploit openings. Openings created by trauma manifesting physically. The orphan's pain becomes something to manage. This is intentional. Bloodborne does not allow you to forget what you are doing, even as it requires you to do it. When the final blow is struck, the orphan does not collapse dramatically. It weakens, stumbles. The crying softens, not into silence, but into something closer to sorrow than rage. And then the form dissolves. The nightmare construct breaks apart, revealing something small and almost gentle. From Kossi's corpse rises a pale, translucent figure, weightless, quiet. This is the orphan as it should have been, unburdened, unarmed, at peace. It ascends slowly into the sky, leaving behind the storm and the beach and the weight of memory. There is no triumph in this moment, only relief. As it disappears, something fundamental changes. The rain does not stop immediately, but it loses its weight. The chanting fades. The pressure that defined the nightmare begins to lift. The curse is breaking. Not because justice was served, not because the past was corrected, but because the pain anchoring it has finally been allowed to end. The hunter's nightmare begins to collapse. Old hunters can finally die for real. Victims can move beyond repetition. Guilt loses its architecture. What remains is silence. Standing on that beach, next to Kossi's corpse, the hunter is left with no celebration, no reward that feels sufficient, only understanding. This was never a battle meant to be won. It was a reckoning meant to be endured. And when it ends, nothing is erased. The massacre still happened. The villagers are still dead. The child was still stolen. But the cycle of revenge, the endless repetition of suffering, has finally been allowed to rest. The nightmare does not forgive. But for the first time, it remembers quietly. When the storm finally loosens its grip, the world feels unfamiliar. Not brighter, not healed, just quieter. The collapse of the hunter's nightmare does not arrive with spectacle. There is no great shockwave, no triumphant music, no sense of cosmic balance snapping back into place. Instead, things simply begin to end. Hunters who once wandered endlessly fall where they stand. Their weapons slip from hands that no longer remember how to hold them. The blood that sustained them dries, darkens, and loses its pull. They are allowed to die. This is not mercy granted by a higher power. It is something closer to exhaustion finally being acknowledged. The nightmare, having lost its anchor, can no longer justify continuation. But the world outside does not reset. Yharnam remains broken. The healing church's crimes remain embedded in stone, doctrine, and memory. Blood still calls to those desperate enough to listen, Ending the nightmare does not cleanse the past. It only prevents it from repeating itself forever. This distinction is vital. The Fishing Hamlet Massacre is often framed as a singular atrocity, a moment where scholars crossed an unforgivable line. But Bloodborne's quiet truth is that it was never alone. It was simply the moment where every justification collapsed under its own weight. The curse did not exist to punish curiosity. It existed to expose entitlement. The belief that knowledge is owed. That discovery excuses intrusion. That progress sanctifies violence. Those beliefs did not die on the beach with the orphan. They persisted, refined, institutionalized, renamed. The nightmare remembered them all. And when it ended, it left behind something far more uncomfortable than relief. It left responsibility. The hunter who walks away from the shore carries no visible mark of what was undone. There is no medal for ending a cycle of suffering, no ceremony to acknowledge restraint where violence once ruled. Only the knowledge that some truths cannot be unlearned. You now know what built the hunt, what fueled the church, what price was paid for every vial of blood. You know that monsters were not born, they were made. And that knowledge changes the meaning of everything that came before. The city's suffering is no longer abstract. The beasts are no longer faceless threats. The hunt is no longer a noble calling corrupted by necessity. It is a system that worked at the cost of humanity itself. This is the final gift of the Fishing Hamlet. Not power, not ascension, but clarity. The villagers understood this intuitively. They did not seek to master the sea. They respected it, lived alongside it, accepted change without trying to dominate it. Their transformations were not attempts at godhood. They were adaptations born of humility. The scholars could not accept that. They wanted control. And so the world taught them, slowly, painfully, what control costs. When the nightmare fades, the sea remains. Waves continue to rise and fall. Tides shift. Storms form and dissipate. Life continues, indifferent to whether it is understood. Kos is still dead. Her body still lies where it fell. But her final act was not vengeance. It was preservation. She ensured the truth could not be buried beneath centuries of justification. She forced memory to outlive narrative. And when that memory was finally allowed to rest, the world did not improve. It simply became honest. Bloodborne does not offer redemption. It offers awareness. And awareness, once gained, becomes a burden no one can set down easily. This is what remains after the rain. Not peace, but the end of denial. Even after the nightmare loosens its grip, the Fishing Hamlet does not fade into history. That is the final cruelty of the sin. Most atrocities disappear behind time. They are softened by distance, reframed by language, reduced to dates and footnotes. Responsibility blurs, emotion dulls, memory becomes manageable. The Fishing Hamlet refuses all of that, because its consequences are not confined to the past. They are built directly into the present. Everything that defines Bloodborne's world traces back to that shoreline. The healing church did not rise despite the massacre. It rose because of it. The old blood studied there became doctrine. The techniques refined through violation became standard practice. The belief that humanity could ascend through domination, not coexistence, hardened into faith. By the time Yharnam fell fully into madness, the original crime no longer needed to be remembered. It had already succeeded. This is how systemic sin survives. Not through remembrance, but through normalization. The citizens of Yharnam did not know about the Fishing Hamlet. They did not need to. They trusted the church because it healed them, because it gave them relief from pain, because it spoke with authority and certainty, and the church believed in itself. It believed it had inherited the right to decide who could be sacrificed for knowledge, who could be reshaped for progress, who could be dismissed as collateral. The scholars told themselves they were different from the villagers, more advanced, more enlightened, more deserving. And so the sin repeated itself, cleaner, quieter, behind closed doors and polished sermons. Patience became experiments. Hunters became tools. Blood became scripture. No curse was needed to enforce this. Human certainty was enough. This is why the hunter's nightmare is not simply a punishment realm. It is a counterweight. A force that exists only because the world refused to hold itself accountable. The nightmare remembered what institutions forgot. It remembered that knowledge was taken, not earned. That faith was violated, not misguided. That people were destroyed, not lost. And it ensured those truths could not be erased. When the orphan is freed, the nightmare does not collapse because justice has been served. It collapses because memory has finally been acknowledged fully. The pain was seen. The source was faced. The child was allowed to end. What remains afterward is something far more dangerous than ignorance. It is awareness without instruction. Bloodborne does not tell you what to do with this knowledge. It does not offer a new doctrine or moral code. It does not present a better institution to replace the ones that failed. It simply leaves you with the truth and walks away. This is why the Fishing Hamlet Massacre is Bloodborne's greatest sin. Not because it involved gods or cosmic beings, but because it revealed something deeply human, that when faced with the unknown, humanity's first instinct is not reverence, but ownership, not patience, but extraction. Not humility, but entitlement. The villagers did not seek to control Kos. They accepted her presence and adapted. The scholars could not accept adaptation. They needed dominance. And dominance always demands victims. Even after the nightmare fades, the question lingers, unresolved, uncomfortable, unavoidable. If the fishing hamlet had been left alone, would Yharnam still have fallen? Bloodborne never answers this, because the answer does not matter. What matters is that once the line was crossed, there was no return. The world that followed was built on that decision, layered with justifications until the original act seemed distant and abstract. But the nightmare knew better. It remembered the first violation, and it made sure the cost of forgetting it was unbearable. This is not a story about monsters hiding beneath the sea. It is a story about how easily people convince themselves they deserve what they take, and how long the world remembers when they are wrong. The fishing hamlet was destroyed in a single night. Its consequences reshaped reality itself. And even now, long after the rain has quieted, the echo of that choice continues to ripple outward, unseen, but never gone, waiting, just beneath the surface, after everything has been revealed, after the nightmare has loosened its grip and memory has finally been allowed to rest. What remains is not explanation, but silence. Bloodborne is a world obsessed with sound. The shriek of beasts, the clash of steel, the chanting of scholars, the crying of a child on a rain-soaked shore. Noise is constant because noise distracts. But when the fishing hamlet story reaches its end, the game leaves you with something far more unsettling than answers. It leaves you with quiet. The sea continues to move. Waves roll in and pull back. The rhythm never changes. This is important. The ocean does not care that Kos was violated. It does not care that a village was erased. It does not care that hunters screamed in eternal repetition. Nature does not punish. It does not forgive. It simply continues. This silence forces a realization most stories avoid. The universe did not intervene to stop the scholars. No divine hand reached down to shield the villagers. No cosmic rule prevented the massacre. The Great Ones are not moral arbiters, they are mirrors. Kos did not curse humanity because it was evil. She responded because she was wounded, because something precious was taken without understanding. The curse was not justice, it was grief given form. And grief does not resolve neatly. When the orphan ascends, it does not bring balance. It does not undo the past. It simply ends the scream that held the nightmare together. What follows is absence, the kind that settles in slowly, long after the storm has passed. This absence is what makes the fishing hamlet linger in the mind, not because it is loud or shocking, but because it refuses to fill the space it leaves behind. There is no replacement belief system, no new source of hope, no promise that things will improve, only the understanding that something was lost, and that loss shaped everything that came after. The villagers lived without trying to master the unknown. They accepted change without demanding dominion. Their lives were small, quiet, and complete. That kind of existence rarely survives history. It does not produce monuments. It does not leave doctrines. It does not demand recognition. And so it is often the first thing erased. The scholars believed they were advancing humanity. In truth, they were erasing an alternative, a way of living that did not rely on extraction, domination, or transcendence at all. Bloodborne never says this explicitly. It doesn't need to. The silence says it for them. Standing at the edge of the sea, whether in the nightmare or in memory, you are left with a question that has no answer. What would have happened if the scholars had walked away? If curiosity had been tempered by restraint? If reverence had outweighed entitlement? If humanity had accepted that some truths are not meant to be owned? The game never answers. Because it cannot. The moment curiosity becomes certainty, the outcome is already decided. This is the final lesson of the Fishing Hamlet. Not that knowledge is dangerous, but that unchecked certainty is. The belief that understanding grants permission, that discovery excuses intrusion, that intelligence justifies harm. These beliefs did not die with the scholars. They persist quietly wherever power meets the unknown. And the sea continues to listen, not because it plans to punish again, but because it remembers. The silence between the waves is not peace. It is warning, a reminder that the world does not need monsters to become horrific, only people who believe they deserve answers at any cost. And as the tide pulls back once more, leaving Whetstone glistening under dim light, the fishing hamlet remains where it has always been, at the edge. Waiting, not to be rediscovered, but to be respected. As the waves pull back from the shore and the rain finally fades into the distance, we'll leave the fishing hamlet where it belongs, resting quietly at the edge of memory. Its story was never meant to be solved, only remembered. If you're still awake, let your thoughts slow and drift. And if sleep has already found you, let it carry you somewhere calmer than the hunt. Thank you for spending this time with Games-Lore-to-Sleep. If these quiet journeys through game worlds help you rest, gently press like and consider subscribing. It helps this channel continue bringing peaceful lore to those who need it. More stories are waiting in the shadows, and when you're ready, we'll explore them together.